I am super excited for this episode. I'm very excited because I know this is something that we talk about a lot. We talk about cultural consultants. We talk about, like, you should hire these people, or hey, this is where this project has gone way off the rails, and a cultural consultant would have been a great addition to the team. But we never
Talk
actually
to someone.
talked to someone. But we never actually did an episode on the actual process of cultural consulting. So, for this episode of Asians Represent, I brought in two experts. One, the foremost expert on starch in the TTRPG industry. You are technically you are technically the most knowledgeable person on starches in the TTRPG industry, Dr. Emma Yasui. And
Edible tubers hit me.
if you want cultural consulting on tubers, this could be a thing. We'll talk about this. And I'll say it. Some of the best hair in the game. Hiromi Koda. Welcome back, by the way. Last time we had you on the show, we just had our hands.
Yeah.
We just had our hands. And this time we have our faces. Because I think, again, visibility is important. Creators of color and professionals of color in this space need to be seen and heard. So very excited to have both of you here. Now, both of you work as cultural consultants, myself as well. But we've worked on a variety of projects of different sizes, right? I know, Hiromi, you worked on Neon Dynasty Kamigawa. Huge.
Yeah.
Is that the biggest project you've worked on?
Yes. Amusingly and coincidentally, although I guess, the Pride SOD that was just mentioned, so the Pride Secret Lair.
I bought it. I bought it.
Yeah.
Did you work on that?
Yes, I did.
Oh, yo, that's awesome. Oh, that's so cool.
I'm when it comes out and you get the zine, I'm in there as the cultural consultant because the queer community is also a culture.
Yep.
Yeah.
And because of that, and because our fantastic art director had us do monoline doodles of our faces to stick by our names, when it comes out, I will technically, by the smallest of margins, be a published Magic the Gathering artist.
Yo, that's awesome. Oh, that's so cool. Fun. I bought it because this is the first Secret Lair drop I've ever purchased. I really wanted to get the cat one, but this was before I had got sucked back in. I was like, oh, the art is so amazing. They're so cute. But I was like, I don't need to spend that money on Magic. And now I'm like, shit, I should have spent that money on Magic. But I saw this, and first of all, the art, incredible. The art is incredible. Second of all, if there was ever a reason to buy very, very pricey Magic the Gathering cards, this would be it. I really like this one, and now I have two friends who've worked on it. Jabari is one of the artists on the set, and that card, that card is
fucking
just
phenomenal.
So incredible. First of all, I want a mana confluence, and I don't want to drop several $100s. Now, I could buy a mana confluence with art by somebody that I know, and it's a dope card that I'm going to put in my decks. And I pre-ordered the foil. I literally had it watching the countdown, because I don't know how fast these things go, and I'm like, I blocked out time in my schedule to buy this. I literally...
It's very Daniel of you.
I literally, on my work schedule... there's a 5-minute block in my my work schedule there's just focus time on my schedule, because I was like, I gotta buy this. And I'm so happy to hear that you worked on that, because when a lot of people think about cultural consultant, they're for Asian stuff, for no, there is we are more than just Asians. And I'm super excited that they actually brought on a consultant for this. And that actually, I think, ties into one of the questions on our agenda. So I'll make sure that I bring that up afterwards. But oh, that's so cool. So you've now worked on 2 Magic the Gathering products. 3. What was the other one?
The other one was on Strixhaven after it came out.
Oh, cool.
There was, as you know, there was some concerns with Strixhaven.
Concerns, yeah.
And I went in and helped with those concerns after the fact.
So did
which
that?
is why I'm not in the set credits for it,
Right?
Because everything I did was sort of after the fact, going like, these are things that we can do on stories that are coming out, and this is what can happen going forward, because that stuff, we can't undo it.
Yeah.
So it was almost like came in and did a little bit of a post-mortem on Strixhaven and helped them kind of flesh out, well, this is where we can go in the future if we want to revisit it. That sort of work.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. Did you get credit on any of the D&D content for Strixhaven?
I don't think so. I don't think my work was expansive enough to merit that, but like, I also don't know what the Strixhaven D&D content looks like, because I haven't picked it up yet. So I'm like,
okay,
I'm pretty sure I'm not credited though.
I'll have to check later. I have a copy. Wizard sent me a copy. I'm very surprised. After that episode of Asians Represent, I'm very surprised they sent me a copy. I was so excited for Strixhaven. I was like, when I saw the Killian Liu character, I was like, the art, I was like, first of all, and this is on the internet now. There's a Dicebreaker article where they quoted me and be like, Killian Liu is such a smoke show. Like, that's on Dicebreaker now. I was like, oh damn, I wish I looked like that. Like, I love the costuming and everything. I was legitimately like so hyped for that, and then it was a huge letdown for me. And it's something that I think it was my biggest disappointment.
Oh no!
In recent sort of gaming memory, because it was like this huge potential to have something like a setting and like a character that like I personally could like vibe with, because like, first of all, like, fuck J.K. Rowling. Like, I don't want anything to do with like Harry Potter. Like, I want a better magical school. And there was a product that would have an Asian lead that, at the time, I had that hair.
I was gonna say it could have been your cosplay.
It could have been my cosplay. Yeah. Like, you know, that could have been the costume that I wear to all of the cons, and that could have been me. But then it ended up being like a huge letdown. And I don't think I've ever been really disappointed like that before. And I remember when we did the multiple episodes on Strixhaven, we were constantly talking about having a cultural consultant. You needed to have somebody there. And this will tie into, a question that we have later, and that's, well, what if you're a creator of color? Do you need a cultural consultant? And we're going to talk about that. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. If you're going to leave now, the answer is yes. Yeah. But that said, but before we really dive into things, we've just been talking about you, Hiromi, and your very 3 impressive credits. First of all, I'm still like riding that high. I love it when people I know succeed. I love seeing other people just absolutely crushing it. And another person who's crushing it is you, Emma. Am I?
You see me look inward, go, oh God, Emma.
Oh God, am I? I think you are. I mean,
I've gone all in since you asked me to read through L5R. I'm now fully invested in all of this.
How many people can say that they got into TTRPGs because a friend of theirs said, "Do you want to read Legends of the Five Rings live every
Have you
Friday?"
heard about L5R? You want to read it on Twitch?
Yeah, I don't. How many people can say that's how they got into TTRPGs? But since then, I mean, A, you're a moderator in the Asians Represent Discord server. B, you've worked on quite a few projects. Like this was like you started doing this during the pandemic. Like
Yeah.
it's been about a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, been about a year. So, you and I have worked on two projects, one as consultants and another as writers. And I've recommended you for a whole bunch of others. And
People have started tagging me on Twitter too, which I really appreciate.
oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm like the kind of person who's like, because of Asians Represent, people always come to me and are like, "Oh, do you want to consult on this?" And I'm like, "No, but here's who you should ask." And like both of you are like my go-tos now for like Japan. So we were originally supposed to have another guest, KP. KP will come back for a future episode because this conversation is one that should happen more often. Now, that said, before we dive any further down the rabbit hole, Daniel getting excited about Hiromi's projects, Daniel getting excited about Emma's projects, I want to first take a step back and talk about the subject, the topic of this episode, and that's cultural consulting within, the scope of tabletop games. So we're talking about Magic the Gathering, TTRPG content. That's what people, kind of come to Asians Represent for. Now, one of the most common responses that I saw to our criticisms of Legend of the Five Rings and our very, very public criticisms of Oriental Adventures was, it's fantasy. It's not real, right? It's fantasy. Why are you upset about something that isn't real? Well, fictional worlds, I want to start with this, fictional worlds aren't created in a vacuum. We take all of our biases and our influences, and they work their way into our creations. So it is impossible to completely divorce our fantasy creations from reality. And that's where cultural consultants come in. And I wanted to start by asking both of you, since you've both worked on projects of different sizes, and you've been in this game for, you have different experiences. I'd love to know, like, when I say cultural consultant, what do I mean? I'll start with you, Emma. Like to you, when somebody says in your Twitter bio, it says cultural consultant, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, I partly use it because it is a term kind of recognized within certain communities and industries now. But to me, like, when I first started this, I'm like, I don't know what I could contribute here, but sure, send it my way. And then I went, oh my God. So in a way, it is hiring a person with a perspective or experience that they're going to see something different when they look at what you've produced and what they're handing you, especially if you can't see what any problems could be. That's when you have to pass it off to someone else because you can't see it anymore or couldn't see it in the first place for various reasons. And like I said, this doesn't make anyone a bad person, but like, we're not going to see things the same way. So yeah, for me, cultural consultant is a really kind of nebulous term. I don't know if Hiromi can narrow that down anymore.
Yeah, so like I think one of the key components for being a cultural consultant is that in order to provide the consultant service, they kind of have to be detached from the initial drive of the project, because part of the value of cultural consultants is that like we're not attached to, like, we don't have like emotional ties to like this mechanic or this character, or like if I come on as a cultural consultant, I'm not going in and going, that's my boy, I can't
Yeah.
criticize that. I spent so much time on that character. Like, no, no.
Yeah.
You need to be able to be objective, and if you're and willing to call things out, and it's really hard to do that if you're the one who made it. Uh, like in the same way that like if you're a writer and an editor, you shouldn't fucking edit your own writing. You can
Yeah.
edit other people's stuff, but not
Right.
your own.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a really good point. And I mean, we're already jumping ahead to another discussion topic. But it's like, yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to be objective if you're involved in the actual creation of that content. So to kind of add on to this is like, first of all, a cultural consultant is somebody who operates almost outside of that creative production. You are an advisor. You are a consultant. One thing that I always say is that, well, what is the goal of a cultural consultant? Emma, you mentioned that it's kind of an ambiguous term, which is totally true. Some people kind of take cultural consulting, sensitivity reading, and like cultural development, and they kind of say they do the same thing. Others will say they're completely different. For me, a cultural consultant is very much an umbrella term for professionals because all three of us have wildly different backgrounds. For professionals who are basically hired to verify that a product doesn't contain offensive representations of cultures before that product goes to market. The ultimate goal, at least in my mind, of a cultural consultant is to minimize harm. And for
And
a
you should
company,
add to
oh,
that it's not just before it goes to market or culture in general, but you need to consider which market it's going to and who the consuming audience is going to be. So you need someone who's kind of aware of not just the content within the product, but who it's going to.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So we could say the goal of a cultural consultant is to minimize harm and maximize, we could say, consumption within a given market.
Hmm.
One of the things that is also interesting, and I believe that like Hiromi, you mentioned in when we were playing Magic that you actually had a hand in also naming a lot of the characters in the Neon Dynasty Kamigawa set. There were two consultants on that, you and James Mendez Hodes, and you were involved in like various aspect of it. I know that Mendez was involved a lot in the world building, and you seem to be involved a lot of in the like the language component. Is that right?
Yeah, and also in the fiction. So like
Right.
uh as like one kind of random thing that I did. I don't remember what story it was, but like someone went to a ramen stall, and I'm like, awesome, sweet. And then like the descriptions that they're giving of it, I'm like, that's not what a ramen stall is like. And uh like it's like the author clearly was like, I'm excited about this, I want details, and like 70% of it was like, yes, absolutely. And then there was like 30, and I'm like, let's tweak this and tweak this and tweak this, and now it sounds like you're there. Like if you have the experience of going to a ramen shop or like one on a street, like that's now it feels authentic. And like without cultural consultants, like you don't know what you don't know, which is like a permanent problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about a variety of like solutions. I mean, one of the obvious ones is having a really diverse creative team to begin with. But sometimes, companies are small, or you're just the sole creator of a product, and that's not always feasible. So that's super interesting. One of the things that in our chat, someone had mentioned L5R, and we had talked about it before. And one of the things in L5R that we spent a lot of time talking about was not only the fiction, but the game mechanics, that sort of honor mechanic. And yeah, that moment of silence that we just had kind of says it all, right? Another role of a cultural consultant is, and we see this a lot in board games, or that they're actually brought in as someone to not only look at like themes and narrative and fiction, like you said, but also how those are all interwoven with the actual mechanical interactions of the game. Uh, this happens a lot in video games, but within our sort of space, board games and like card games a lot. So to kind of circle back to what is a cultural consultant, we have a couple of goals. We have the goal of like minimizing harm before it goes to market, and of course in relation to consumption within the market, but also the overall process of just verifying that something doesn't contain offensive representations of cultures that are used to inspire it, whether intentionally or not. Intentionality is very important in this. Now, that said, when you were talking about the fiction of Neon Dynasty, you're talking about this like ramen stand as an example. Well, there's probably somebody listening to this or watching this and is like, well, I've been to Japan. I know what a ramen stand looks like. Why can I just go be a cultural consultant? Like, what qualifications does it take to be a cultural consultant? And I know this is a super loaded term, like question. Like, what are the qualifications of a good cultural consultant? Emma, I'd love to start with you. Since you are somebody who has worked outside of TTRPGs and have kind of come in with this, like, I'm not a lifelong gamer.
Oh, yeah. And every time I get another job, I'm like, hey, cool. But like, no expectations that I'll do it again. So as Hiromi said, like, I come in and I'm just like, what's this? What's that? Fuck all this. What does this mean? I don't know. Is that a D&D thing next? So I do know quite a bit now about different games and things, but I still kind of have that attitude. And I'm coming from academia, like, I have a PhD in anthropological archaeology, and where my research is based in northern Japan. And in academia, you're kind of made to believe that you're never really good enough and you don't know anything. And so when you first suggested that I do some of this work, I'm like, what am I going to bring to this industry that I've had no contact with before? But like, yeah, I'm mixed Japanese diaspora that has lived and worked in Japan with a lot of Japanese colleagues and spent a lot of time in Hokkaido in particular, which has its own situation going on with the history of colonization. So like, I have a lot of lived experience as well as training in research and writing and expressing ideas, as well as rhetoric. And I'm very familiar with the history of stereotypes of Japanese people in and outside of Japan. So I've also taught in a lot of pop culture and media courses because pop culture and media in Japan overlaps with a lot of things, including archaeology. So I've kind of dabbled around a lot of things relevant to the gaming industry. And then, yeah, here we are. Did my resume build specifically in order to do something like cultural consultancy? Absolutely not. Yeah, because like, I don't know if that exists at this point. It's still a little bit open out there, and yeah,
absolutely.
I can understand people having a hard time making that first step to finding someone that can look at their stuff. But like, yeah.
So in your case, you have deep academic expertise. You have a master's and a PhD. You have lived experience, and you have like a deep knowledge of the subject culture, which in this case is also contemporary Japan, and how it intersects with gaming and pop culture. So you have these.
And I've said somewhere else before, like, being an archaeologist and like a Japanese descent person, this isn't mandatory, but you are generally more aware of history and stuff related to, your family or where you are and where you come from. And then with archaeology, you have to be super aware of so many time periods in order to process whatever has been published about what you're researching. Because, written record always needs to be put in context because it says more about the time it's being written than it does about the time being written about. So even though I do one of the earliest cultural periods in Japan, the Jomon period, I have to know the entire span of Japanese history from the Paleolithic all the way to present day in order to process what is said about and written about the period that I work in, which means I'm familiar with a whole lot of stuff. And then my family history intersects with a bunch of North American history and moments. So, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like I feel qualified. I don't know if I did at first, but now I'm like, wait a minute, yeah, okay, I can see
I mean,
this.
I totally think you're qualified because I remember the first gig you worked on because this person asked me to work on it, and I was like, this isn't for me. And I was like, I have a friend, and I don't know if she would do this because she's never really expressed interest in doing this kind of work before. And and I don't know if this is what she wants to use her academic knowledge for, but I'll ask. And
Yeah.
you ended up immediately being like, oh, no, change that.
Yeah.
And you,
So in some ways it's almost like grading an essay.
very much so, yeah. And I think one of the things you brought up that a lot of people don't understand, don't see of a lot in academia is a part of being an archaeologist is also understanding the cultural context in which knowledge is actually being produced in the first place.
Oh yeah. What is knowledge if not its surrounding context? Like
Yeah.
you can't separate these things. There's no hard facts. Like,
And these things
it's not
come
how
up a
it
lot
works.
when we're
Yeah.
talking about things like L5R or we're talking about things like Karatur. I mean, you bring up the chrysanthemum and the sword all the time.
God, that book.
Because
Yeah.
it's always because it was deeply influential in how people in the West understand Japan, and
Yep.
a lot of people who work in games now, they are influenced by the knowledge that is produced from that Western understanding of Japan.
And you don't need to read those books to get that because there's a bad habit of these things permeating society to a point where you don't even know where these influences and ideas come from.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's where
a cultural consultant comes
these
in,
people come in,
right?
Yeah.
So, what about you, Hiromi? What's your background like? Because we all have very different backgrounds in arriving at this sort of profession. What's your background?
So, fun fact, also academia.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I clearly did not.
When I said it's like reading an essay, you went,
Like, yeah. My background is linguistics. Mostly, well, I'm at like this weird nexus of linguistic fields. Like, my master's is technically in teaching English teaching English for speakers of other languages. But like, it's to say that it's a teaching degree is like super reductive because it's also concerned a lot with phonetics, phonology, sociolinguistics. Sociolinguistics is so fucking huge to the field because you cannot teach a language without also instilling culture on someone.
Yeah.
And like, because of that, like anytime I'm looking at words, I'm like, what is this doing? So like when you mentioned rhetoric, I was like, yeah, fucking horns, because composition and rhetoric studies is its own thing in the English department usually, but like it's also incredibly important for sociolinguists and applied linguists. So like, that's kind of like where my background started. And then the teaching market in Seattle depends heavily on foreign students.
Mm.
And at that time, Trump had just gotten elected president.
Oh, okay.
And all of a sudden, there weren't any students. So there weren't any teaching jobs. So I'm like, all right, well,
Pivot.
do something else now. and that something else was making tabletop role play games. And at some point, someone, I want to say Nerdburger Games, they make capers and probably other fun stuff that I can't remember off the top of my head. But at some point, they wanted someone who knew Japan and Hawaii. And while I'm not myself Hawaiian, I have a lot of understanding there because the Okinawan diaspora in Hawaii is huge.
Oh,
Fucking huge.
didn't know
Like,
that.
yeah. It I'd have to look at numbers, but like if I had to guess, I would say that Hawaii is probably like the number 2 spot for Shimanshu outside of Japan. I could be wrong,
When
but
I
if
think
I am, it's close.
when I think of like the Japanese diaspora, I always think of Brazil, because I think that's
yeah.
like the biggest one, right?
Brazil, and there's a long
Then we just
history
we talk
yeah.
about martial arts too, and where that comes from there too,
Yeah.
because of the
And
Japanese
also
diaspora.
Peru, and
Yeah.
yeah, lots of places.
Oh, that's very interesting. So your academic background was in linguistics. That's where I'm super weak. Languages are just like right out of my head. And then so you kind of got started because the teaching market wasn't there, and you're like, hey, I'm going to start creating games. And then, well, you're a superstar now.
I started as a sure, why not?
Yeah, sure, why not? I mean,
sure, why not to a friend and see what happens.
hey, that's kind of how I started too. Actually, the start of me doing consulting work was also a sure, why not, but also like kind of a weird racist misunderstanding. For me, my background is academia.
It's kind of bad because we're all kind of academic.
Because we're all kind of academics, but I
we
think
should say it's not necessary.
but it's not necessary.
It's not.
It's not necessary. Though I think there is definitely a trend though. I know for us, I think we've all kind of said we really only work on certain things.
Yeah.
Right. I will not do things for like, Japan. I won't do things that are like Korean. I will really only do things that are like China and like the Chinese diaspora. And I do like consulting for things that are like the biological sciences, but that is outside of the cultural consultancy. Getting to consult on like how do arachnids kill things is like a really weird thing to consult for, but I've done it because I spent a year of my life doing macro videography of arachnids feeding, which is still the coolest thing I've ever done.
Sweet.
Yeah, if you've ever seen a tarantula up close liquefy a cricket, it's the coolest thing ever.
I have not, but now I want to.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you after. You're gonna love it. I've got so many weird things. But that said, yeah, like one of the things that we've talked about is we've all got academic experience, but one of the other things that we have is also lived experience. Lived experience is super important in a part of this, cultural consulting equation. So we have academic experience, we have lived experience, but then we also have just this like other factor of just deep knowledge of the subject culture, right? Because people will have a different combination of these 3 things. Some folks will have a lot of lived experience and of course like deep cultural and subject knowledge and less academic expertise. Some folks will have more academic expertise than say, cultural knowledge, and some folks and with a little sprinkling of lived experience. For me, I tend to be, deep knowledge of subject culture, academic experience with slightly less lived experience because I was born here and I only worked in China as an academic. So for my background, mine is super weird because Emma and I had the same graduate supervisor. I have a master's in Japanese archaeology, but I never consult on things that are Japanese. I have been asked to, and I have said, I have a friend named Emma. You should hire them. I've been asked to do that, but for me, I don't feel like my academic expertise is beneficial enough to a project where I think that deep knowledge of the subject culture and lived experience would be far more valuable. Or you should have a cultural consultant who has these two other things. One of three things is not something that I think you should hire for. I also have.
It's hard.
Oh, go ahead.
It's hard though because you've used the word expertise, and so what that means to different people can be really hard. And maybe three academics are sitting here because it's super easy to sell academic experience as a type of expertise that is recognized. And there is, I would say, like, not a long history, but there is a trend that you can hire a consultant with, you know, cultural expertise that is fully learned and totally academic, but they're not of the culture that they've studied. There are so many Japanese history majors and
how many people with an
all
East
of
Asian
that.
studies degree?
And there are a bunch of people who practice different Japanese religions that have gone there to do residencies and things, but they're not Japanese themselves and haven't experienced the diaspora side of it. Like, those would be seen as people with expertise. So I think at this point, people like Hiromi and myself, we could be like, we got that. And we're from the diaspora, which in this case, because most of what we work on is North American products for a North American audience or English speaking audience, is kind of where it's at. So it's an easy sell. But Maharu's been dropping a bunch of questions where it's like, can we answer this? Because I'd say this part of the industry is really young. So there aren't lists of like what you should have and in what quantities and how you got it and what that means for the project.
Yeah.
So
I do think that having like a broad amount of understanding, which is generally what like lived experience gets us, is sort of essential to being a cultural consultant, because I think it's less useful to know that, like, just going back to the fucking ramen shop, just because it's a clear example. Like, if I know everything about a ramen shop, like I grew up in one, was born in one, worked in one for like a million years, like that gives me huge amounts of expertise on this one thing. And then, like, if I'm asked to be a cultural consultant and they're talking about like yakitori stand, I'm like, well, I don't know.
I don't know that kind of stand.
But if like you have a decent amount of knowledge about a broad range of things, you're able to pick things out of text and go, I don't know if that's right. And then that's where the academic background is very useful, because we're taught how to research things. And sometimes the gut feelings pan out and we're like, yeah, no, that is wrong. I didn't know why it was wrong, but it stuck out of my head and I'm like, did research. Okay, yeah, fix that. And sometimes like the gut impulse is just, no, I just had a different experience than whoever wrote this, and that's fine.
yeah.
But being able to notice when something seems off is super valuable for a cultural consultant. And like, it can't really be taught.
Yeah. I think the Killian Liu is the perfect example of that, because from what I understand, Killian was created by an Asian person, and that story was created by an Asian person. But one thing that a cultural consultant would have brought up was the medium to which that story is being communicated: flavor text, art, and card titles. Right? There is the fiction, but most of the people are engaging with that character through the cards itself. And while that is a very relatable story of intergenerational trauma and abuse, a cultural consultant will point out that maybe that's not the story to tell to your North American market, since this is playing on like a stereotype, something that Asian people have to deal with all the time. there is one thing that you brought up, and it made me immediately think of something I learned recently, that despite being somebody with, I have an academic degree in Japanese archaeology, I would never be able to point out or identify if somebody asked me to consult on a Japanese sort of piece of Japanese media. So I binged watched this fantastic anime called My Dress Up Darling. And there is a scene where one of the main characters, she is eating something and she is just like experiencing this euphoria from where, because the food is so good. And in the scene in the background, there are these really sort of like cartoony, like the art style was very dramatically different, horses in the background. And I was like, what the fuck are these horses? And I was trying to figure out what they were. Were they some sort of pop cultural reference? What did this mean? And I learned that it was a linguistic thing, that I would have never known this. So I learned that, first of all, umai is like, tasty. And then, but I also learned in contemporary Japan, people like to shorten things. Which is horse. And then that's why those horses are there. But that's why there are layers to this, right? There is proficiency in the language. There is an understanding of, contemporary linguistic and cultural trends in shortening words, and why certain decisions were made in the artistic creation. And this is the reason why academic credentials alone are not the sole qualifier for a cultural consultant. They are important.
You gotta know Japanese love a play on words.
Yeah, and I don't, right? So
terrible dad jokes all around.
Yeah, I have been called samui more than once, but many times. Samui is Japanese for cold, and is also the word for like dad jokes, like the feeling of a dad joke.
Yeah.
I was trying to contain laughter earlier as you were explaining like how Japanese likes shortening things and how sometimes that causes confusion. I think Emma already knows where I'm going.
I'm loving this.
So it's a store / restaurant called First Kitchen.
Okay.
And Japanese has to like transliterate into Japanese. So instead of First Kitchen, it's Fast Kitchen. And then that's too long. So they chop out the middle. Fa King.
Okay.
Fa King.
Yeah.
They have rebranded as
Okay.
FK.
Okay.
Love it.
That's great.
I don't know to what extent that rebanding has kept people from calling it hockey. Like they tried, not cultural, well, tiny bit culturally related. In Seattle, there is the South Lake Union area, and there was a trolley, and so they called it the South Lake Union Trolley. SOUT. They've changed the name. No one calls it by that name.
Just because everybody remembers that first one. Yeah. That's great. I mean, that's something that a consultant would have pointed out. Now, I think you bring up a really great point there, and you've also done something that a lot of consultants do. And Bashir, who is another cultural consultant, I will put Bashir's information in the show notes as well, because Bashir is wonderful. Bashir had mentioned in the chat that another thing that a cultural consultant needs to be good at, not just proficient, but like I would say highly proficient in, is being able to communicate and teach. Because a part of being a cultural consultant is helping a creator or, like a product manager, depending on the scale of what you're working at, helping them understand these blind spots, helping them understand these potential causes of harm, and being able to identify and triage them. And I think this segues us perfectly into like, we've kind of established, what a cultural consultant is, what the goals are with cultural consultancy, right? It's minimizing harm within the context of the target market, and identifying, offensive representations of cultures. Another thing that we talked about was like, well, what are your qualifications? Well, we said, hey, your qualifications are kind of this like amorphous thing. You're like this blob made up of various quantities of these three sort of key ingredients, right? Academic expertise, lived experience, and sort of, deep, deep subject matter understanding of the culture. So the next thing is, well, what kind of work does a cultural consultant actually do? We talked about, Hiromi, your work with, naming, legendary characters in Neon Dynasty Kamigawa, doing a post-mortem of Strixhaven and helping identify these are the steps that we need to take moving forward if we ever revisit this. This is where this went wrong, that sort of stuff. Emma, you kind of you explained it's kind of like grading essays, going through and being like, okay, remove this. This is bullshit. Change this name entirely.
Yeah.
Why did you
I
make
will
this
say,
decision?
like, in improv, it's the whole yes and thing. In cultural consulting, I've found it's a lot of no, and here's why.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one.
A lot of
And the here's
explanation.
why is essential.
Yes.
Because like you were saying, like it's a lot about communication. Like it's not in telling someone no, like telling creators no, that's wrong, is almost not important because they need something there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There needs to
And
be an explanation.
if you don't explain why it's wrong, then they're free to make another choice to fill that gap.
Yeah.
And is it going to be a good one? Well, you didn't tell them why it's wrong or what would be a good substitute. So they are going to just put whatever there, and there's a high chance that it's probably also going to be ill-informed. So
Yeah.
like, why is honestly more important than no.
Yeah. I mean, like the thing with being a cultural consultant is that like your work is both proactive and also reactive.
Yeah. Well, especially if you're coming in late on a project. And if I don't know how much change will happen, especially if something's pretty much ready to print, like I like to do degrees of like severity, like this absolutely has to change, or this is how I feel about this based on my experience or my understanding. This is something that you need to watch out for. Like there are different levels of comments, but I find a lot of the ones where it's just like, no, I have personally felt the effects of this stereotype. You need to remove it. I don't care what stage you're in, like communicating that kind of stuff. But it's tough because, like, I don't know. My favorite part is to be in on a project early, not when it's already done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most common things that a cultural consultant will do is basically like a content audit, right? That's kind of what you described, right? You're doing an in-depth review of the contents of a product to identify and triage issues that need to be resolved. Because one of the things you mentioned, a huge factor in here is the fact that you don't know if they're going to act on all of these things. I could go in and identify all of these really harmful things, but if I'm constantly saying, no, here's why, no, here's why, no, here's why, I cannot, in confidence, know that that will all make it to the final cut, right? That will make it to the final product. For me, when I do this kind of work, I like to sort of divide my comments into like, this is a critical change that needs to be made. Here's why. This is something I recommend. This is like, here's a recommendation. And then here's one that you should be very cautious about, right? This has the potential to spiral into something harmful.
Yeah.
And this leads into what you were saying about it's better to have somebody at the like start of a project rather than at the end. And I actually had that experience recently with a project where I was brought on in multiple roles as like, I went like narrative writer, game designer, narrative writer, like back and forth in multiple revisions, and things were constantly changing. And for me, I had to sit down with the project manager and basically say, okay, I understand where you're coming from with this suggestion. We're talking about like factions in this game. And they were like, well, if this faction is like the Asian faction, I'm trying not to spoil any details. If this faction, it's not the Asian faction, I'm just saying that it's a very specific Asian culture. But if like this faction is the Asian faction, will that exclude other gamers? And they were like, can you write it so that non-Asian people can be in this Asian faction and rise to leadership in this Asian faction? And I said, absolutely not. And here's why. I was not the cultural consultant. I was actually the narrative writer for this. But I was able to take these experiences as a cultural consultant and say, no, here's why. This is the context in which all of this is written. This is why what you want cannot actually be a reality. But that said, as a narrative writer, I am fully understanding that I am also acting with my emotions. This is something that I created, and I don't want you to change it. And Hiromi, you mentioned earlier, like, you can't bring emotion into this. You can't be the consultant of your own work. Mm-hmm. And in this conversation, I actually said, okay, we're having a conversation here about, the dynamics of these different world factions. This is what I'm saying. I think you should also bring in a consultant because this project did not have a consultant on it. And there were many creators of color working on it. And I said, we cannot have a single consultant for this project. We must have multiple consultants. And that's where I kind of wanted to go. And a cultural consultant doesn't always work alone. Depending on, of course, the scope of the project and the budget, you may have multiple consultants, like Neon Dynasty Kamigawa had 2 consultants, 2 people with very, very different backgrounds and expertise working on that. So for this one, I was like, here are my blind spots. 1, I am deeply attached to what I wrote. 2, the location that I wrote about is not one that I have a true lived experience in. I have been there. I know a lot about the history of this culture, and I have deep cultural knowledge and academic knowledge. But my blind spot is that I have not been there. I have not lived there. I do not know what it's like to be a local there. So here's a consultant that I know will have that expertise. So again, this goes into these various factors can still, academic expertise, like historical knowledge, like deep cultural knowledge, but I was lacking that lived experience in this setting, which was New York City. I've never lived in Manhattan, nor do I want to live in Manhattan. So I was like, I am lacking this thing. We need a cultural consultant with that degree of expertise. So to circle back to the whole question of, is academic expertise kind of like the critical qualification? No, it really depends on the nature of the project and what you're looking for in a consultant. And I had asked KP to come on because I knew that KP is not an academic like Emma and I, and this is before I knew that Hiromi was an academic. So I made it.
Yeah, we'll say it's rare.
All academics.
Yeah, because like in general, each field is a little different, but in general, Western academia is still incredibly bad at representation of marginalized and racialized peoples. So academia should definitely not be the number one criteria, because then you're automatically excluding a whole lot of people who didn't go through that process. And like, I might put PhD on my Twitter and all that, but I don't think that's what gives me credibility. I do that because I fucking earned it.
You earned that shit.
A lot of femme academics kind of hide that. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I just spent so much time and effort. But no, academics should not be number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've really demonstrated why. Now, things happen all the time. I think sorry, but that's terrible. That was an Oriental Adventures statement.
Weather happens.
People are bored. People die. Wow. I will say that
exotic.
Shit happens on a tabletop gaming product, and things slip through the cracks, right? Mm-hmm. Often because consultants are brought in, on a reactionary basis, but also sometimes cultural consultants are brought in and they aren't involved in certain aspects of the production. For me, there was one glaring card on the Kamigawa set that I thought, as a member of the Asian diaspora, I felt it was deeply offensive, and it's Dockside Chef. And that one was like, oh, that one really slipped through the cracks. But I can't blame you and Mendez because you both were involved in different aspects of the project. So it was actually the card that I was hoping I would never get in my booster packs, but I got one. And on that card, I mean, it's a decent card, but it plays off of one awful stereotype that a lot of folks of the Asian diaspora. Are you looking it up right now, Hiromi?
A fucking eyeball?
Yes. Yeah, you see, exactly.
Yeah.
Right? You got it right away. I got it right.
Excuse me?
When we all saw that card, we were like, what the fuck? Yeah, Dockside Chef is a card that plays into the stereotype that Asian food is gross and disgusting.
And weird.
Weird. And the fact that it's like from a narrative, like an art perspective, like the flavor text as well, and the mechanics of it, right? The fact that it's like it's a black card, and like the themes of like black mana in Magic, but also like it the kinds of tokens that the card generates, and the fact that the art is literally like, oh, you come down to the docks, you're gonna eat some weird shit from the Asians.
Yeah.
And
From
it's like
the Asians.
right, but the thing is, like, things slip through the cracks, and Hiromi, you weren't involved in that at all because you told us what you were doing. That was not you, and I'm seeing your reaction now, and this is the first time you've even seen that card, maybe.
Yeah. Also, and this is besides the fucking point, but why is there both pork and octopus in there? Fucking
Because
pick
it's
one.
weird.
Pick one.
Well, because I think
You're fucking up the flavor.
See, this is where you could have gotten a chef as a consultant too, unless that's another qualification you have.
It is not.
Dang it! I thought but yeah, right. That's another, like, you didn't even see that card. You didn't see the art. You didn't see the flavor text, the mechanics, because often a lot of these projects are heavily siloed, right? We also just got a comment in our Twitch chat is pork and octopus is actually a good combo in Korean cuisine, right? So these are
I'll
where
try it.
I'm down to eat it. But that card I found just deeply offensive, and I was like, that's rough. And I know that you both mentioned this earlier, and it's that, I think, Emma, you said, I don't know if these changes are actually going to take effect.
Yeah.
Like, I'm being paid to say these things. I'm being paid for my expertise and my time and my effort.
But like, you also have no choice over what it is you get shown or what gets done afterward. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
so, like, usually I ask if they do publish my name as a consultant that there be a little disclaimer that I'm not in charge of the final product and its contents. Those final decisions were made by someone else and not myself.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on that, Hiromi? If you're not still
My
reeling from this
thoughts
card.
I'm getting that card off my fucking screen. Sorry, like I'm still like stuck on the wriggling is how you know it's fresh. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, that's not like universally appealing for folks.
No.
Like not even like in Japan, like not even among cultures who eat octopus is that universal. But okay, sure.
Yeah, I think of Korean cuisine.
And then-
I just think of, that's what I think of. But this is not a Korean set.
But like ramen broth is usually salty. Like it doesn't have to be like, but like it almost always is. And the reason why octopus, when like you want it to squirm as like a cut food, it's because salt is triggering the sodium gated channels, and like they'll like start twitching. So like as soon as you put the octopus in there, it's just gonna go all over the fucking place. And I'm just sort of like, why would you do that at a stand?
So you
we're
know
gonna make a huge mess.
So you know that it's fresh.
That
Yeah.
that is such a crap flex.
It's a bad card, and I think even if you think about like the mechanics, it's like tap 2, sacrifice an artifact or creature, and draw a card. So it's also playing into this theme of like, oh, it's gross, and you're killing things to get things.
So we just added a long list of, and here's why to the no. Like, there's so much going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, maybe somebody actually said something about this, and it made it through.
Get us the hell away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Hiromi did not see that card in the production of this.
To get us away from that and more to a more pleasant Magic spot.
The new set, the new secret lair.
The Pride Secret Lair dropped yesterday. I think it's only going to be available until like Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, which is a weird time to
the
cut
sale
off
ends
sales,
at the time of this recording, this live stream, 2 days, 15 hours, 49 minutes, and 10 seconds.
I love that you had the tab there.
Because, look, I just watching it. Your card won't get charged until August, by the way, if you buy it on the August 5th release date.
Okay.
I'm going to shill this now because my friends worked on it. But I'd love to hear about your experience.
So I was brought onto that early, and that I think helped out a ton. Like I think I was brought on pre-sketch. Like none of the artists had done sketches yet. It was just like at a concept. So like this is what the card should look like. This is what the card should look like. This is the card should look like. And like kind of in response to that, I'm going, okay, so we're talking about the LGBTQI Two-Spirit plus community, which means we have a lot of ground that can hopefully get covered. And so like this is the like let's go through the letters. What representation do you have for each of these at a concept phase? Like not even sketches. Like what representation exists? What could happen to the concepts as like a tweak to get us to more representation? And what would be bad representation? Or what would be representation that will cause problems? And like at the like in the appendix of my concept review, I'm going through and listing off pride flags that they might want to use and some caveats that go with it. Like I remember a fan was like complaining that there were no lesbian pride flags in the thing, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is there is, as far as I know, only one non-problematic lesbian pride flag. All of the other ones have at least a connection to something that is a problem. Like the lipstick lesbian flag excludes butch lesbians, and the Labris lesbian pride flag has kind of gotten adopted by TERFs, and the 7-color sunset lesbian pride flag is kind of made by a TERF. And so the 5-color, which is arguably the most popular lesbian pride flag now, as far as I'm aware, that creator is fine, but it's derived from the one that's made by a TERF. And I'm like,
oh my God.
And so I'm like, here is the sapphic pride flag. And like, as far as I know, there's no problems with it. But also, very, very few people recognize it on site. So,
yeah.
But they had all that knowledge up front, which let them make whatever creative decisions that they wanted to, like the Soul Ring.
I'm looking at the Soul Ring right now.
Shit.
The flags, there's the flags are actually in the card art. And Emma, I'll put the
Yeah,
link in
send me
our
this.
I'll put the link in our chat. It is the amount of detail on the Soul Ring card is absolutely incredible.
Oh,
So before color was added, I was able to identify, I think, 45 elements uh, that had some kind of representation, and so I could like comment on that. And then color got added, and I'm like, I can't even count now.
Yeah.
Like, there's just a massive amount of representation, and the fact that they got Marsha P in there is just
yeah.
yes, fucking yes.
Yeah,
What's the P stand for? Pay it no mind.
All of these cards are fantastic. Like absolutely fantastic. That's super cool. So you were brought in from the very beginning. I know that Emma, a lot of the things that you've worked on, initially you were brought in like towards the end. They're like, I finished this thing and it's available, but I've now learned what a cultural consultant is. Can you take a look at this? And I know that you're now working on a project as a narrative writer, not a consultant. How has that experience been for you? Kind of coming in at the end and then now trying to be proactive.
Right. So it started with me being a consultant, but not getting paid to do that. So part of that is working in existing material and seeing what's out there and what to keep and what to change and how to do that. And so that's been a bit of a balancing act, but I'd say more on the consulting side, I have been brought in super early. So people saying, I was thinking about doing this, but before I even start, what are some things I should think about? And do you have resources for me to read? And it's like, yeah, I could do that. Especially if you're willing to read some stuff. Here's a bunch of things. And I've done that at least once. And I'm on another project where it's also nothing has been done yet. So creating a bank of reference to sort of direct artists in making things that are probably, you know, less driven by stereotypes and movies and, you know, television shows and people watching anime, because it's not the same thing as getting someone to come in and consult.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the chat is like, got so many questions about this Soul Ring card.
Yeah.
Cause like, it is just super, super cool. The thing I'm most sad about is the fact that I won't be able to fill all of my decks with these cards. Because I mean, it's not as expensive as other Secret Lair drops, but if I want that Soul Ring in every single commander deck I have, it's gonna be a pricey Soul Ring. Now, I think, you know, on the note of like on like this like really cool like project that you're on. Again, like if you folks are into the into Magic the Gathering, curious about Magic the Gathering, this might be the thing to buy. Also because it actually shows Wizards of the Coast that the market wants this. Very important to do that. And if the market,
and then it doesn't need to be dropped during Pride Month to be able to sell or do a thing too. Yeah.
Yeah. But also like, hey, if this is well received and people really like it and people buy it, this is another indicator that consultants can be brought in at the very beginning rather than at the very end.
And as Hinome said earlier, I don't know if you were recording, but like what culture means can also, you know, be thought about a bit more. Because there are multiple cultures and it's not all just, you know, what we think of as heritage, nationality, ethnicity, and, you know, that area of culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, trick question. Defining culture, never a fun time.
That's the question that the first year anthropology students kind of go, oh.
Yeah, and it's a trick because there's no great definition to culture.
And often, you know, consultants, you know, I am not just a Chinese person, right? There is more to my identity than that particular aspect of my culture, right? And those other aspects of my identity are also what make me a qualified consultant in talking about those ingredients, right? Now, I have a question for you folks. We've talked about like what a cultural consultant is, what they do, what kind of qualifications they might have. One question, and I think we answered it, is do I need to have a cultural consultant if I'm a person of color or if I'm, a marginalized person? And the answer is yes, you should. Simple as that, for the reasons like, you outlined about this secret layer drop, for the reasons we talked about, my own experience and being deeply, deeply attached to what I've written. We all have our own blind spots, and it's always good to have somebody watching out for us as well.
And I'll say, not to, I don't know, words are hard, not to get up in your face, but you keep saying blind spots, and that's something
that's
that you
true
should
too.
probably
You're right.
remove from your language.
Absolutely. And it's good to have people call you out on that, right?
Yeah.
And to have productive conversations as to why these things shouldn't be in your lexicon. Now, I have a couple of questions from...
Actually, I'd like to jump back to that one.
Go for it, yeah.
We've established that, even if you're a person of color, it's very valuable to have a cultural consultant because they'll have a different background than you. And if they're not also on the production team, that are going to have the ability to spot things that you won't because you're invested in it in a different capacity. But also, even within cultural communities, there's not homogeneity. Like there's differences. With the Pride set, everyone on the team was queer. Like everyone on the production side, everyone, the artists, everyone. But like we all had different things. Similarly, when talking about Japan, like while I'm Japanese American, on a more nuanced level, I'm Shimanchu. I am Yeaman, I'm Okinawan. And that is a vastly different experience with the Japanese culture than someone from Tokyo. And it's also a very different experience from an Ainu person living up in Hokkaido. Mm-hmm. Like, even though like there is a large amount of both real and perceived notion that like the various Asian cultures are homogenous, we're fucking not. And the more diversity that you can throw in, even within our communities, it will only further enrich what you're doing creatively. Like, nope, it's off camera. I'm not gonna reach for it, but like, there was a project that I was working on a while ago, where it's like centered on the 1644 China, which is, if you're familiar with Chinese history, fucking exciting period. And the thing is that like most people who start writing about Chinese culture in general, they're like, Han Chinese is the only Chinese. And then off they go. Did that just get you real?
Yeah, I got real.
Sorry. So for people who don't know, there are a lot of ethnicities in China.
Yeah.
There are a lot of them.
I got something.
We could probably sit down and just like name them for several minutes straight. But like,
I gotta bring up something that somebody had asked me.
Go for it.
Related, this immediately came to mind. Let me find it. Somebody had sent me a DM on Twitter. First of all, we talked about this on our episode on emotional labor. Don't just solicit people for advice. Where was it? Let me find it. Oh my God, where was it? It was the perfect example. No. Okay, I remember what it was, but someone had basically sent me a DM on Twitter saying, hey, started watching your Caratura series. I have some questions. I'm running a game set in Karatur, and I was wondering, what language do they speak? And then they proceeded to tell me what Cantonese and Mandarin was. And then they said, but could they also speak Korean? And I went, what is happening? In my head, I was like, what is happening? Because
and this is where that whole "it's just fantasy"
It-
thing doesn't work.
doesn't apply. Let's circle back to the top. What I said was that fictional worlds are not created in a vacuum. So when you were like, yeah, there are different cultures, like various different cultures in China, 100%. But also when you say, do you speak Chinese? Which language are we talking about here? Because before I was, when I was doing my language requirement for the unfinished PhD that I had, I learned how to speak Mandarin. I went to Beijing and I was like, crushing it. Immediately went to Shanghai and was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Because the dialect, the Shanghainese dialect, doesn't even sound Chinese to me. Because I had never heard it. And I heard it for the first time and I was like, where is this the jet lag? What's happening to me? And
I could read the menus. That was about it.
yeah, but like, here's the thing, right? Like, we make these generalizations. We also look to cultural consultants. They're like, oh, they're Asian. They're going to be good for this, right? People have approached me thinking that like the first gig I ever got, and this, I'm not proud of it. First gig I ever got, they were basically asking for an Asian cultural consultant. And this was when I didn't have a great job. And I was like, you know what? They were like, we're looking for somebody. I was like, yeah, I could do this. Here's my academic expertise, right? They said, here's the budget. And I went, okay, I'll take it. And little did I know, this creator had assumed that I was Korean. And I was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. I could do work as a developmental consultant because this person was trying to write something for 5e. And I was like, I can do that. This is like, I can work on the culturally agnostic parts of this. I can look at it for narrative consistency. I can look at it from like a world building perspective because I am an archaeologist. I understand how cultures work. I understand how things are interconnected within a world. I'll help you with all of that. The budget was 5,000 USD. And I said, let's amend my contract. I'll take 2,000 USD. And that 3,000 USD, this is a Korean person whose expertise is actually in Korean folklore. They live in Seoul. You probably know them. This creator was also, I think I might I'm not trying to out the... I'll tell you the consultant, Sang-jun Park, who's most excellent person I always direct people to if it's stuff like that. This other person was basically a white person living in Korea. And they didn't actually know the language. They were living there for a long time. And I was like, I can't help you with the Korean stuff. And for me, I made a financial decision, which I probably shouldn't have. But I basically said, that $3,000, get a Korean consultant. I could do the D&D stuff, and I could do the world building stuff. But that's how I got started consulting. It was like, ever since then, I've been extremely picky. And I've also asked very specifically, do you think I'm Korean? That is one of the questions I will always ask people if they approach me about consulting work. I will always ask, is this a Korean thing? Because I'm not Korean. Now, that said, when it comes... Sorry, I'm just thinking about this. Like, it was both like a blessing and like I'm not going to say a curse, but an awkward experience. One of the things I am very cognitive of when people ask me about consultants is that dynamic of lived experience, academic expertise, and like deep cultural subject, like sort of matter understanding. A lot of people are just looking for an Asian person to put a stamp of approval on a project. I mean, this is the Asians Represent podcast. We're going to talk about that. But one of the things that I'm really cognizant of is directing people to consultants who have a combination of those things that might suit the project. But if you are a creator out there, and I'm going to solicit both of you for, I'm going to ask a question, and you're looking for a consultant, what should you be looking for? Because one thing that we don't want to have is a consultant who's seen as sort of a monolith, right? Because you said not all Japanese people are the same. We did a whole episode on the Ainu. We've talked about the Jomon a lot and that complex history. We've talked about the Yayoi. We talked about, Okinawa and Neon Dynasty. You've talked about your background here, right? None of us we're not the same. And so that's awesome. I think that didn't get cropped out. That's awesome. But that said, when somebody is approaching you or somebody is looking for a cultural consultant, what should they be looking for?
First of all, they should be looking.
Yes, yeah. That was an assumption that I was making. Yeah. They're already looking, and they're trying to identify someone. Yeah. Are you looking for a name? Are you trying to use a consultant for their clout? Are you looking for what are you looking for if you're a creator and you're looking for a consultant?
I don't know that a consultant is gonna bring much clout to anything. Like if you're creating something and like your goal in hiring a cultural consultant is the clout that they bring
or the stamp of approval,
you're already on bad footing. Finding how passionate they are about the topic, I think, is probably going to be the easiest thing to see from the outside. Dig through my Twitter, find out how much I talk about Uchinaguchi. If someone needs a consultant for Shimanchu, my resume's there.
That's what happened when we were prepping for that Neon Dynasty episode. I was looking at your Twitter and I was looking at a thread that you did on that goblin card, Goro Goro. Mm-hmm. And I was like, gotta have them on the podcast. This gotta be a thing. And then I DM'd you.
Yeah, forced them to play Magic with us.
We should do it again.
Yeah.
I made an Ishin deck actually after that recording because we kind of came to this conclusion that Ishin is actually maybe a mixed character. And I was like, I'm vibing with that, and I have my Ishin deck is really good now. I'm really hyped about it, and I'm really excited because I can get a new Alesha to replace into my Ishin deck with the old Alesha. But so you've mentioned we're not looking for clout, we're not looking for a stamp of approval. When you're finding the right cultural consultant, one of the things that you should look for is passion, because that person is going to be invested in your project, invested in that positive representation. What about you, Emma?
Someone in the chat brought up that it should not be the only qualification because some people are very passionate and there's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, maybe when we're looking at those qualifications, passion is another ingredient, right? We talked about academic expertise, lived experience. Maybe we throw in passion there as well. So what about lived experience is one thing. There are lots of people who have sent me emails or sent me DMs being like, I wrote a TTRPG and it was deeply inspired by the summer that I lived in Tokyo. Can you consult on this? They almost always say no. Because lived experience is one thing, but what about somebody being of that culture? How
I would
what?
say of the group who would be affected by the content
Mm.
itself.
So
So
is
not
that
like
some
the
is that
audience that
a
it's directed at, but who's going to feel the effects of more stereotypes and tropes, or yeah, you know, the stuff that we're looking to remove. Like, who will receive the harm if this goes out?
Yeah.
yeah.
Like that actually, like when we were talking about like how we got in, and like one of the things was like like my first consulting gig was on Hawaii, and like I have a lot of knowledge of it, but like I'm also not Hawaiian, so like if I if at like the next time I get offered a gig and it's for Hawaii, I'm like, there's plenty of Hawaiians that you can hire. Like I I know enough to do a good job, but I'm not invested in making sure that absolutely everything is right. And like they've been fucking colonized like for entirely too long. And like I sympathize because I'm also an islander who's been fucking colonized, but it's a different thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that the chat is really, really apologetic that I am often mistaken for being other Asian cultures. Um, but a lot of people, I don't actually think it's people mistaking me for being like Korean. I mean, that has happened. I think a lot of people want to hire me because they want me to talk favorably about their stuff on this show, and that stamp of approval and that kind of intent is very telling of a project and a creator. Okay, so when it comes to being someone of the group that could be affected by the harm that you are seeking to mitigate, that is, for the audience, I just want to confirm, that is a must. Is that a must? Or are there exceptions to that?
Well, this I think goes back to the you don't know what you don't know, and
Yeah.
the people most affected by something are most likely to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a must then. Um,
I would stick like an asterisk there with like a page long caveat,
yeah.
because like there there are people not of a culture that could probably do a very good job, but also that's also because they've spent like 50 years living there, and like that they but like the vast majority no, no,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
are.
Because,
Yeah.
like, the person I think of is my supervisor, who has spent a lot of time across East Asia, but is a giant
He's
white
the
man.
whitest
And
white
so
dude.
all of his time spent there is not just through a particular lens, but he gets treated a particular way when there that is very different. So there's just a lot to it's a mess. It's super
Yeah,
complicated.
it's
So
it's
yeah,
very
when
complicated.
looking for a consultant, I guess there's a lot of conversation to be had. So you got to vibe check a little. You got to be explicit about what it is that your project is or what you want and what you're thinking. Be ready for people to say, I don't think that's for me. Maybe they'll offer you more names, maybe they won't. But it is worth knowing that despite it being a hellscape, Twitter is where a lot of people who can do consultation work can be found.
Another place is actually the Agents Represent Discord server.
True.
Facts.
There is an upcoming product that's coming out, and half of the authors are all people who have been on Agents Represent or in the Agents Represent server, and it's super cool to see people get opportunities like that. So yeah, Twitter is a great place because that's kind of where we are. If you're in Agents Represent, like if you're in the server and you're not Asian, or you're Asian and you're looking for a cultural consultant, hey, look at that, lessons. There is a channel that's just opportunities. You can post there, or you can look there if you're looking for an opportunity. Use this as like a frame of reference. this episode. Somebody had actually asked, and this is a good time to kind of segue into questions. Is there a Twitter tag for RPG consultants? There's not. There isn't actually.
Not that I know of.
Not that I know of. There's no like. I've actually never tried going and making Asians represent a hashtag that we use very frequently, because it takes up characters, and I have a lot to say sometimes on Twitter. But often looking at those who like signal boost others, a really great person, a really great account, POC and TTRPGs is constantly signal boosting marginalized creators. Utopia is another great channel. Asians represent. We're like very, very specific to Asians. Utopia has a broader array of guests and much broader representation in their content because that's what they're designed for. So I'd look to other people as well, and then ask around. Even though I've talked about how people have mistaken me for Korean and Japanese or other
cared what you are, yeah.
other Asian cultures, or just never cared what I was. This doesn't mean that I don't mind people asking me. I am always happy to tag in someone else. Oh, you're doing something in Okinawa? I know somebody. Oh, you're looking for something in Northern Japan? Oh, yeah. Or you're doing art and you want to feature like Jomon ceramics? As much as I would love to do that, let me bring in somebody else. Right? So please do not hesitate to DM Asians Represent, send us an email, or DM me directly on Twitter. I am happy to signal boost for other people. Always happy to do that because, look, if one of us succeeds, it's our responsibility to help everyone else succeed, right? Mm-hmm. We grow together. I like to reinforce that we should not approach our community, our space with this scarcity mindset. There's always going to be opportunity out there. So yeah. That said, we have a couple of questions from patrons. I know, Hiromi, you took us back, but it was a great callback to a topic. I'm going to try to go through them. We have 20 minutes left.
We can do this.
JT asks, how can you tell a client that they may have hired the wrong consultant, such as hiring an Indian guy to do a Sri Lankan setting? I feel like JT just kind of like went into my mind. I was like, do you want to talk about your first consulting gig ever? Great question. Emma, you had mentioned this at the very start. When somebody approaches you to hire you, or if you are trying to hire a consultant, always do that vibe check. Be really clear about your intent, the scope of your project, and the type of expertise you are seeking.
I always ask, what is it that I'm looking at? What do you expect me to do? And what are you looking to get out of this? Like,
yep.
Like, or what are your expectations? Like, what's the turnaround time? What am I doing?
and honestly, like just having a scope of work in place for any freelancer, like in any capacity, is actually like that. A lot of people don't do it, but I wish more people did, because there was a thing that got brought up before we went live about scope creep. And
that's the question. That's coming up.
Shit.
That's why I told you ahead of time. But yeah, if you want to do this kind of work as well, be really clear about what kind of work you could take on, right? What are your areas of expertise, comfort, lived experience, and all of that. Okay, so that's the first one. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you're already too deep like I was, be really upfront with the creator. Be like, hey, not my area of expertise. I can help here, but please allocate the rest of the budget to this person, or a person with, this suite of expertise and experience. JT,
and tagging on that. Sorry.
Go for it.
Tagging on that. It's important to do that as soon as possible. Like, I know that a lot of us who work in the creative industry, like, we're anxious beings, and we don't want to be like, but do it as early as you can. Like, it sucks, but it will suck less than if you waited a week. Like, if it's not right, let them know as soon as you can. And from that, maybe you can work towards finding a solution together. But if it's like a week before a deadline and you're like, that is it's a bad fucking time to do it.
Yeah.
And then again, don't be afraid to leave projects. I have done it myself. I have left projects and been like, hey, I'm not going to charge you for the rest. Just don't put my name on this thing. I don't want my name on it. Or if you're going to credit me, don't credit me as a consultant. Or if you do credit me as a consultant, have this little sort of disclaimer like you mentioned, Emma. JT also asked, I think this is one we already kind of answered, but it's how do you handle a situation where you're not brought on for your expertise, but to be an enabler to a team of individuals, not of a cultural setting they're writing about? So I think it's the question is more of, are you brought in to react to things, or are you brought in to proactively help the creative process? And we've already, I mean, this new secret layer drop is the perfect example of that, right? So Pride Across the Multiverse had a cultural consultant who was brought in not to react to the final product, but to guide the creative process. So your question, JT, is actually what should be done.
Or I heard that question differently.
That's how I heard the question.
Enabling. I heard it as more of stamp of approval style, like enabling some people to do what they wanted to do anyways.
So that's
to be able to say like, "Ooh, we had someone look at it."
So I guess
either reading of that we have it.
Yeah, either for Emma's interpretation, the answer is the same as your first question, and it's do that vibe check, be really clear about wanting to know the intent of the person looking to hire you and the nature of the work,
and get a disclaimer put on there if they intend to attach your name to it.
Yes. If you accept the job.
No, thank you. If it's going to be full of nonsense.
Yeah. One thing that I am also really cognizant of is I keep talking about, you could turn down work, you could say no, but I also have the privilege of having a good day job. I have regular income. I could just disappear from TTRPGs and be totally fine. But not everyone has that privilege. Also, a lot of people are just deeply committed to this industry. So I totally get it if you accept projects that you need to put food on your table. I get it. So that's why things like that disclaimer are important.
I am going to briefly point out that James made a good point about sometimes you just say you shouldn't include that at all. And I have certainly done that for people who want to include the I knew. I say, it's not my place to comment on that, but also it's not your place to include that. So just don't. Leave that out for now.
Yeah. There are times when it's just like, I know that you want to include this because, you believe this to be a good thing, but you may actually do more harm trying to do this as a throwaway or something like that.
Yeah. So it's like highly advised against it. Like I can't stop people from doing stuff, but no one hears why.
Yep, exactly. So why don't we talk about that tough question? So Kat, who is also a moderator on the Discord server, asked, how do you deal with scope creep for a project you've already spent time working on? Hiromi, did you wanna dive into that?
Yeah, so I touched on it earlier, and the real answer to this is get a scope of work before the contract. And if you don't, then everything is triage. So like a scope of work for freelancers, for folks who aren't aware, is saying like, this is what you're expected to do, this is how we would like you to do it, and this is when. These are the things that we will provide you for you to respond to. And things never go exactly according to the scope of work. Like they just don't.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, if there's a scope of work in place, they're going to be somewhere along that. Someone in the chat is asking, what is scope creep? And so when we're talking about scope in terms of like creative projects, we're talking, or any kind of project, talking about like, what are the responsibilities of this job? What is this person doing? And what what kinds of things need to happen that this person's involved for. Like that is that person's scope of work. And scope creep is when that is either not defined ahead of time, or when it gets that its definition gets changed, where someone starts ending up taking up more and more work, either more sort of like parts of a project or going deeper into what they're supposed to be doing. It is like feature creep, except with people.
Yes. Yeah. So I think so what would you say your answer to be in dealing with it? So it kind of summarized, you would say, get a really clear like scope of work before you even sign that contract.
Yeah, the kind of answer to what if you don't have one, or what if we've blown past the scope of work, the answer is bully your boss. Like you have to set a boundary. If you do not set a boundary, that scope creep will continue forever. And I've done this, and I did this like 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm still gainfully employed in the tabletop gaming section. So like, if you need to bully a boss, if you need to bully your employer, do it. It might suck. You might never get work from them again, but it's a thing that you need to do, because otherwise you are going to be doing like 3 times as much work for the same amount of pay, which also hurts your bottom line. And like you can be like, I'm willing to do this, but that's going to require a separate contract. Like, you're talking about rewrites for all of these things, but that's not what we discussed initially. We budgeted for this. This is what I'm doing. I have done this. If you want this, this is going to be a separate contract, and it's going to be X amount of dollars. And actually, for that client, they did sign me on for that other contract.
Excellent.
I thought that they'd ghosted me for like a solid, I don't know, 6 or 9 months, but they did hire me back to do that other chunk. So like, it's important. Like it's important for your bottom line, for your sanity, for everything. Like, bully your boss. That is my answer.
You got to take care of yourself. Your needs are very important. Emma, did you have anything on this?
No, I was thinking though, there have been a few times where I've been asked to consult, and when I've said like, well, what's the project and what do you want me to do? They're okay describing the project, but then they're like, I'm not sure what I want you to do. Because they'd never hired a consultant before. And they're like, I don't know what to expect or what I want you to do. I'm like, okay, like, then I'll draft up something like, this is what I can do. This is the time you should expect. And for those ones, it was hourly rate. And it's like, what is your budget for? Like, if I think it'll take this many hours, like, what can you afford to pay? Like how many hours do you want out of me? Like,
yeah.
So there has been a little bit of constructive, like, helping with some of that scope and
some folks also are like, I only have this many dollars. What can I do with it?
Yeah.
Well, you could be like, well, I could just look at this particular thing. I can look at this particular chapter. I can just look at the art. There are ways of preventing this for any sort of budget, except for free. So another question.
Even for close friends, buy them some food or something.
Yeah. Even so, Kat has 2 other questions. We'll go through these ones quickly. This one is, I think we answered this one already. Kat had asked, how often is a cultural consultant the only person on a project, looking at it from that perspective versus working as part of a consulting team? I think that really just depends on like scale. Scale is a massive factor in this. Kat had another question, and I think this is a really good one, because I know the answer is going to vary. But for project creators, at what stage should a cultural consultant be brought on? For cultural consultants, is there any point in a project that is too late to work effectively? I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this. I can start with mine if you want some more time.
I
I'd
think
say maybe I have the least experience.
I think I'm good. So
Okay,
like
well, yeah, let's hear
I
it.
I like as when you're creating something, like if you know that you want to involve a specific culture, getting them on board as early as possible is going to save you tons of headaches later on. Because like again, even if you're both from the same culture, you're going to be looking at it from different perspectives. You're going to have different lived experiences. You're even going to have like different points of expertise. So like having a second set of eyes, even if they're similar eyes to you, is just going to enrich your project early on. And I I did I did do cultural consulting work after the fact. So like I wouldn't say that there is a point that is too late, but it depends on what you want out of cultural consultants. Because like if the idea is we need to learn some lessons from this and move forward, then you can hire a cultural consultant after the fact. But you probably want to not do that. You probably want to get your cultural consultants in earlier.
Earlier the better.
Earlier the
They can also
better.
help you research
Yeah.
because even if not academic, probably know of some even like good online articles that summarize experiences, videos even. I tend to throw heavier stuff at people if they want stuff, or if they have the hours and the money to give me the hours, I will read through stuff and summarize it for them because this is something I've been trained at real hard. So not a problem. But I've had people bring me in at various stages, and some of them have even shared where they got some of their information from in order to create what they did. And then, yeah, that's why I bring up resources, because I've really noticed some of the stuff that they use is like, some of it's public domain because it was written in the 1800s, and that's not a good thing to be using.
Yeah, this is where kind of like budgets come into play.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, especially on the note of earlier rather than later, in the in the TTRPG space, one of the biggest things is crowdfunding. One of the things that can be brought up in an initial conversation is we need to have a budget for consulting worked into your Kickstarter goal. You do not want to have a cultural consultant or a sensitivity reader as a stretch goal. Do not do that, because that is communicating to your consumer that safety and harm is really something money's going to buy. You want that to be part of your core product. So
Also, in that case, it's also literally an afterthought.
it's an afterthought. Yeah.
It's one step before the we've released it and oops, everyone's angry. Let's hire someone. But like, yeah.
Yeah. So earlier the better. Earlier the better. In terms of too late, better late than never, I would say. But
and
it depends.
Also, like, depends on how much you're willing to change an existing product, because I would say in general, it's a little too late if you've already released something, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't go ahead and bring in those consultants anyways, and then do your best to either change the product or be better moving forward,
Yeah. Especially for big companies that own like IP, or if you've got like a big company like Wizards of the Coast and hey, we had this huge miss with this Killian Lou story. But let's bring on a consultant so that if we want to revisit this, we don't make these same mistakes. Even though you were brought on way late to Strixhaven, bringing you on is both reactionary and proactive for the future of potential Strixhaven content. But again, not everyone.
It shows that you're willing to pay for the emotional labor that goes into this kind of stuff. Like
100%.
Not just reading the Twitter responses and going, oh no, it's actually like bring someone in, get them to outline everything for you and pay them for their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there are lots of really good people at Wizards of the Coast who think like that and want this to be better. So kudos to those folks.
Especially
Yes.
on the magic side of house.
Yeah. Like,
It has been nice to see an increased use of consultants and sensitivity readers in general.
yeah, I think it's kind of becoming the standard. It's kind of becoming like a standard thing that folks want. So that said, we are kind of at time. There are lots of folks that we have to thank for this, specifically our patrons. We have talked a lot about cultural consulting today. I'm going to try to break this down into multiple sort of short clips to go alongside this main episode. I may even try to make some short form content that we could use, like quick little videos that is like, hey, this is what we talked about today. Are you looking for a cultural consultant? This is what to look for. These are the things to take into consideration. But we've talked about a lot here. I think the biggest takeaway for me from this recording is that, you know, when you're looking for a cultural consultant, there isn't really a standard template for what a cultural consultant is. There isn't a standard template. A cultural consultant is going to be somebody with a very with a background of many intersecting things. When you're looking for a cultural consultant, you're obviously, I think our constant is somebody who would be affected by the harm you are trying to mitigate. And generally that means somebody who is of that culture. You're looking for somebody with also lived experience and as well as academic expertise. And you want a combination of these factors. Now, that said, this episode of Asians Represent would not be possible without our amazing patrons who are named on screen. Thank you so much, specifically to, you know, our guardians, Brooke Bright, Pixelgrotto, Jeremy, Daisy, Arjun, Justin, and Wayan. And then, of course, the most honorable Metal Weave Games. First of all, congratulations, Andreas. Valorous Games, Liana, we're going to make some really cool stuff. Dungeon Glitch / Matt, super honorable. I actually had the chance of hanging out with Matt at the most recent D&D event, the Spelljammer virtual event, which was super cool. Nice. And then, of course, the most honorable times to Epic Impulse and Namex, my buddy Matt. We're going to see each other. We live in the same city. We're going to see each other. It's going to happen. Now, normally this would be the time in the recording when my partner brings in Marla. But my partner's not home yet. So I'm going to go get Marla. And you folks are going to hear the struggle of me trying to get Marla.
Good luck.
So I'm going to do that. Before I do that, also thank you to Gallant Goblin for this kobold plush. It's super cute.
It's super cute.
I think it's koboldplush.com. Gallant Goblin. They have a cool YouTube channel, Asian run channel. This is not sponsored. They sent it to me. I think it's adorable. Look at that. It's so cute. Anyways, I'm going to go get Marla. You'll hear me struggle. And I won't hear anything you're saying. Okay, Marla.
Okay, Marla, look out.
Oh, you're so heavy. Okay. There's Marla. Marla, say hi. Say hi. No? Marla? You wanna,
What is
you know,
this?
Say hi to
Where
anyone?
am I?
Hello, Marla.
Mara.
Blink.
Oh, no. It's in a huff into the... There's Marla's belly.
Yep.
It's so big. Okay, Marla, say bye to everyone. No? No,
No.
Marla? Okay. Marla's gonna have her revenge soon. But yeah, that said, before we wrap up, do you folks want to hear like a really funny Marla story? It's a revenge story.
Ooh, it's a cat story and
It's
a
a cat
story.
revenge story. So we usually do a longer preamble at the beginning, but we did not because Steve's not here. So when I first got Marla, Marla was really, really big. Like she had like these really short legs, but because her belly was so big, and she couldn't clean herself. So I decided to give Marla a bath, and I'll post this in our Discord. But when I gave Marla a bath, she looked like a wet rat because like just like all of her fur was just like but we didn't do her head, so she's just like ugh. And this is when I first got her. That night, I'm a really deep sleeper, and my partner at the time He's not a deep sleeper. And I was sleeping, and Marla got up on the bed, and we were like, oh my God, is Marla gonna like sleep on you? And was like sitting on my chest. I probably went, and Marla sat on my chest, and it was like this potentially beautiful moment at like 3 a.m. And then Marla started peeing on me. And Daniel, being a deep sleeper, didn't notice until he felt warm. And his partner was like, oh my God. And yeah, that happened to me. We all love Marla. Marla maybe doesn't love me. But that said, Romy, Emma, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I'm going to link your websites or your social media in the show notes. I'm going to put that on the YouTube video. Very excited. Patrons will have access to show notes on this. I'm going to, tighten up all the notes so people, so they're easier to comprehend than my sort of like thoughts. But everyone will have access to that. Again, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who's watching us live, watching us on YouTube, or listening to us on our podcast feed. We appreciate you. We have one more episode for this season until we take a 1-month break. And maybe we'll come back with Dungeons and Asians. We'll see. Super hyped. That said, take care, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody.